During the French and Indian War, the British and Stockbridge Mohican Indians were allies, but now in 1778 they were on opposite sides of a great conflict. On August 31st, 1778, there would be a bloody ambush by the British that would eventually render the Stockbridge Mohicans unable to protect their lands, and they would limp west to the unknown frontier. The bloody ambush was led by none other than John Graves Simcoe, commander of the Queen's Rangers, who was aided by a young Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton. Years before the war, the Indian settlement was visited by a missionary that taught them the ways of Europeans, and the tribe took to them and adapted to the new culture that was slowly encroaching on their lands. With these ideas, they were also exposed to the ideas of the Revolution. So when the Revolutionary War broke out, they were quick to join the Patriots. They actually had sent some militiamen in 1775. The tribe had even made alliances with the Six Nations and Shawnee Indians to ensure peace and support to the Patriot cause, although the Shawnees would eventually end up betraying the Patriots later on. The man in charge of the regiment was Abraham Nimham, whose father David had served with Rogers Rangers during the French and Indian War. Daniel was given a military commission as a captain in the Continental Army. Traveling to Indian communities in Canada and the Ohio Valley, he served as a diplomat attempting to bring these nations to the Patriot cause. Daniel's son Abraham Nimham was put in charge of the Stockbridge Indian Company. The journal kept by Hessian officer Johann van Ewald of the Schleswig Corps had the best description of these warriors in the Stockbridge Indian Company. According to this Hessian officer, the warriors had no facial or body hair since they had pulled them out by the pincers, while their head was fully shaved except for the hair of their crown. The Stockbridge Indians also had rings through both of their noses and earlobes. The warriors wore hats of bast, body-length shirts of coarse linen, long linen trousers down to their feet, and deerskin shoes. The warriors carried a musket, a quiver of about 20 arrows, and a short battle axe, which they knew how to throw very skillfully. In the summer of 1778, the Stockbridge Company was sent to White Plains to serve under the overall command of General Charles Scott, a Virginian. The Saratoga campaign of the previous year had ended in disaster for the British, and the American Continental Army held sway from the White Plains north in the Hudson Valley. The areas in between were in no man's land. The mission of the Stockbridge Indian Company, as well as other units stationed in White Plains, was to patrol the area of southern Westchester County right to the New York City line, which was still under control by the British, and to gather intelligence on British troop movements. 11 days before the Battle of Kingsbridge, the Stockbridge Indian Company ambushed a British force under the command of Hessian Andreas Emmerich, killing one of his chasseurs, or light cavalrymen, and wounding another. On the morning of August 31st, the Continental Army force, composed of non-Indians, commanded by Colonel Mordecai Gist of Maryland, ambushed a green-uniformed Hessian company in what is today Yonkers, New York. 6 Hessians were killed and 6 others were wounded. The Hessians were forced to retreat back to the New York City line. By this time, the British command had already drawn up a plan to retaliate against the Indians around the same area where the Hessians had retreated to safety. They gathered an imposing force that included 500 British regulars, Hessians, and Loyalist troops, including many mounted. They planned an ambush that would wipe out the regiment completely, and they even had 3 of their highest-ranking officers involved in implementing the plan. Andreas Emmerich, who was involved in the planning, was a professional German soldier from Westphalia who had served with the British force since the French and Indian War, and he was the commander of the Hessians. Another person involved was John Graves Simcoe, the commander of the Queen's Rangers, and the third person involved in the planning was Simcoe's friend, Banastre Tarleton, who was recently put in command of a hussar unit in the Queen's Rangers. The British set their trap on Cortland's Ridge, on the northern end of what today is Van Cortlandt Park, right on the Bronx side of the border with Westchester County. The Stockbridge Indian Company, composed of 60 warrior soldiers, fell right into the trap. The sight of Emmerich's forces drew the Indians into the open. Then Simcoe's infantry struck and hit the left flank of the Indians. Surrounded and outnumbered more than 8-1, the Indians attempted to fight back in what would become bloody hand-to-hand combat. Simcoe, who was wounded during the battle, later described the bloody scene in his journal. The Indians fought most gallantly. They pulled more than one of the cavalry from their horses. According to Simcoe's journal, Daniel Nimham called out to his warriors that he was too old and would stand there and die. He was cut down and killed by Private Edward White, a British light cavalryman, shortly after saying those words. Then Tarleton's light cavalry, the 1st Dragoon Guards, composed of 175 horsemen, entered the battle and broke the Indian line of defense. Many in the Stockbridge force, now in retreat, were hunted down by Tarleton's cavalry and killed. Some of the Indians survived by making their escape over Tibbetts Brook. Subsequently, General Scott reported to General George Washington that their return to White Plains, there are no more than 14 Indians. David Nemham and his son Abraham were both killed in the fighting. Simcoe's joint British-Hessian Loyalist command lost 2 cavalrymen, 6 wounded besides Simcoe himself, and estimates vary about the number of Stockbridge Indians killed, since some died fleeing British forces outside of the immediate battlefield or later died of their wounds. Estimates of their dead range from 17 to 40. The conflict was devastating to the Stockbridge community. A month after the disaster in the Bronx, Washington allowed the 4 of the Stockbridge Indians still in military service to go home to their grieving community. The survivors of the Indian Company and families of those killed were denied bounty lands offered to all soldiers who fought on the Patriots' side. Despite the Stockbridge service in the Continental Army and guarantees of friendship and alliance, extreme land pressures continued after the American Revolution. In 1785, the Stockbridge Indians were encouraged to seek refuge in Oneida County in central New York. With construction of the Erie Canal after the War of 1812 and the rapid non-Indian settlement that resulted, the Stockbridge Indians were once again forced to migrate. They eventually resettled their community in Michigan's territory, now Wisconsin. Today, this federally recognized American Indian nation, the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohican Indians,